always been much more interesting is how could I infuse this space, this cloth, this print, with as much richness, as reality, tactile quality, a sense of expressing the material, the process that put it together, how it was connected. Weaving is slow. I think one learns patience, and it's as close as I get to meditation, I guess. It's the mechanical process of drawing yarns through heddles or pushing the shuttle through the webs and watching something grow in front of you.
Larsen's luxurious, patterned, and colored textiles look as if they are hand-woven. The fact is, these fabrics are designed by him and then machine-woven and eventually sold in 30 of his showrooms in as many countries throughout the world. Weaver, manufacturer, and collector, Jack Lenore Larsen is that rare individual whose life bridges art and commerce. His 30-year career as an innovator in textiles has taken him all over the world in search of fresh ideas and techniques. The result, designs that are both elegant and original, designs that enrich our private lives as well as our public spaces. I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein for Handmade in America.
Today, we design collections, not individual designs or colorings, but carpets and fabrics and silks and draperies that work together as a group. And I feel that our shoebox interiors today need the specialness of their seeming to grow out of components that were designed for that space and that person. I think our having a sense of roots, of a place that is ours and is not like a string of dormitory rooms, is the thing to most aspire to, and at least what's inside of that front door must have a feeling, this is mine.
Well, it's been said that you could have become a painter or an architect or a poet. You decided to be a weaver, and choosing to focus on textile design, you are now all three at once. What do you think of that appraisal, and why of all the arts did you choose weaving?
I fell into it like a pit trap. I had no choice whatsoever. I liked architecture a lot. I worked on it till 4 o'clock every night as a student. But with weaving, it was a total commitment. I was hooked and always have been.
Who were some of your mentors that had such a strong effect in supporting you and the direction of your work?
Edgar Kaufman and Edward Wormley and another designer, Edward Benish, have all guided me, been close enough friends to say, Jack, this time you're wrong, to encourage me, sometimes to commission my work. But they've been mentors that I've grown up to be friends of, and that's been very rewarding.
And who first involved you in the crafts movement?
Mrs. Vanderbilt Webb, a grand old lady who founded the American Craft Council. I first came in as a young American. They have those kinds of exhibitions. Then I juried that kind of show. And then I came on when there was a board, I was on the first board of directors. I'm now president of the council and the oldest living member, and I was the fair-haired boy.
Mrs. Webb was the founding mother of the
American Craft
Crafts
Council
and the museum.
and the World Craft Council,
well.
and of course the museum and American Craft Magazine are other aspects of that.
Can you describe for us what your early work was like and what was going on at the time that you first arrived in New York City?
I came here unawares that if you were a fashion designer or a fabric designer, this is the only place to be. I'd come and I'd liked it and I moved here, and then I found out how important New York City is. I hoped to be a consulting designer, but everyone said those who wanted anything I did at all wanted produced yardage or made-up rugs. They didn't want designs, as they were architects and furniture designers.
Talking originally about the late 40s and the early 1950s, when I suspect that design was thought of as a political as well as an aesthetic expression, what were your own goals then as a young designer? How did you fit into that mix?
I was one of the revolutionaries, and it was it was a cause that we were fighting, and it was social, more than political perhaps, but we were against all kinds of refinements, that elegant furs and cut stones and polished marble and servants and all of those things were over, we thought. And that we wanted to create a new kind of environment, and we thought that people would be happier and more moral in it. Designers and architects were not overcommitted and not very busy. We had time to talk with each other. We were few in number, and in many areas, a few people of wealth and conviction, and artists and architects, craftsmen, designers, were a tight-knit group.
And what about that revolution and its promise?
I think we were encouraged when elements of the establishment began to take up not our creed, but our design. And this is true in both architecture and design. I think it took us a very long time to realize that we'd been bought off and captured rather than conquerors.
How did you manage to go into business for yourself in the first place?
Because I didn't know any better. Fools rush in, and I was one of them, and I had no money and no experience. But I just started, and I wove orders, and then I got assistants. We did more. I did then other kinds of things, and lecturing and various things to help subsidize it all. And it grew, and then we started working abroad, and then on power looms, and finally on printing. But it expanded very quickly.
What do you think is the most important aspect for you of your enormously complex and, I dare say, phenomenally successful business?
It's become working as a team. I have a fantasy sometimes of being an infant king that's both looked after and obeyed. And in this family, I have a very central position. Moves over this, and here you're stopped more by the large diamond triangle. When I first started, I envied artists painters who could work all alone, weren't dependent on assistants and suppliers and delivery men and so on. And finally I decided maybe one of the reasons for creating this organization is to be with a group of people with whom I'm central. I'm very, very much at home with these people. I like them a very great deal.
It's pretty good. So could you take a look?
Let me see through the repeat glass.
Collaboration is something I've learned late, that in the early days I felt I had to give my co-workers a finished description of my vision, how it would be made, what it would look like, and the coloring. And now I come in and I say, I have an idea, that I want to share with you, and I think we could do this together. Or we have a problem, and I need your input as we resolve it. And that is collaboration.
Perhaps your most remarkable achievement has been to merge what we usually think of as art with industry. In the end, is this really possible, or is it desirable on any scale, let alone as broad a scale, as you've attempted to do it?
I think so. There are more and more articles now on restorations, for instance, in which we see architectural ornament, which is an art form, and how it was made, how it can be restored, and it is possible. And if you go back further to Gothic periods, where thousands of craftsmen, artisans, would work with masters and with aesthetic trendsetters together as a team. And it's possible that more things can be at least a transition between the highest and the lowest.
In the fall of 1981, the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, a branch of the Louvre, presented a very extensive retrospective of your work. How involved were you in the preparation of that show?
I've had a number of big shows in major museums, but this one somehow seemed worth my time pondering over. And I've made thousands of designs. And
how many?
I suspect maybe 6,000, and we could show 300. So of what to leave out, in a way these are all children, was the hardest, slowest part, and then how to show them and what to group together. And I was actively involved in that.
Well, in reviewing all of those almost 6,000 designs, did you come across any that you'd prefer not to show to the public today?
Oh, a lot. And it was interesting how crass and aggressive some of our designs and colorings were 15, 20 years ago.
And how do you define crass and aggressive in coloring?
As demanding attention. And I think that furnishing shouldn't do that at all.
I've heard that a line in a book of poetry by Paul Eluard influenced you in your selection of palette during the late 50s and the early 1960s.
He said at the end of a poem dedicated to his friend Pablo Picasso, "If you love the intense cloud, pour into every image its warm summer blood." And I love that cloud and everything that under the cloud and the nature that I grew up in and the textures, the pine needles and things. 20 years ago when I went to Europe with our first showroom, and they wondered where I got those wild colors that no civilized person could possibly use them. But I wanted to make a strong statement, and with as much vigor as I could. Some I still like. And even very bright flowers or birds, for instance, are not vulgar. But I've done some vulgar colorings, and they were even popular.
What are vulgar colorings?
Ones that are jarring. I think very often there's a dark-light contrast and also a color change. And it could be in another 10 years they will again seem rather
refreshing.
Refreshing, yes.
Is there any color or colors that you would no longer use or never use?
Not anymore. There used to be a very great many.
Is the beige decade over yet?
I think it's over as a thing, although I think naturals and neutral colors, well, particularly natural materials, natural wood and cane and wicker and basketry and all of those things that tend to be easy to maintain are very practical.
Well, what neutrals, if there are any, do you foresee taking the place of classic tones such as beige?
We're finding two things. One, that dyed neutrals, grays and cafe au laits and biscuits, are more practical and seem newer than simply undyed fiber. And we're enjoying, and so are our clients, some colors that are between neutral and color. Very grayed out roses and very soft celadon greens. And
Who does decide, and how much in advance, what color palette to offer to the public?
I sit on the Color Association, in which we try to forecast environmental color 3 years in advance to help manufacturers and retailers. And I'm amazed that a group of 6 or 8 of us, some representing Pittsburgh paint and very large segments of the market, Mary McFadden and I representing more rarefied strata, and we come into agreement as to what we think is going to happen.
Well, why don't you give us a fearless forecast?
What I'm most excited about at the moment, and I think could be a major trend, and that would be using complementary colors together. Greens with reds, almost the same value, and probably not Christmas colors, but very grayed greens with very off shades of red.
What is the newest news in fabric itself?
One of the things that's happening now is a very much broader use of silk, which seems surprising. But because of China's becoming a very active trading partner, silk is available and it's often inexpensive. It's less expensive now than at any time in man's history. It also
Why is that the case?
Because China needs to export a great deal of it. It's one of the few things we're terribly excited about from China in large quantity. And we're finding its thermal properties for keeping out summer heat and particularly winter cold are useful. That's one natural fiber. Sisal and coir for carpets are more and more in demand and have a wonderful grassy, barky look that we like and are not out of price range. And cotton is big these days. It's partly because the Sun Belt is now half of the American market, and fabrics that are not scratchy, that are absorbent, are very popular. And as our summer temperatures are going up, they're useful here as well.
Well, how do you begin to suggest that we improve both our personal and work surroundings and environments with the use of textiles?
I like the contrast of very rich materials with very simple ones, the tickings and burlaps and natural linens and things that cost very little money are perfectly all right to use for vast areas, and then to splurge on some part.
How do you use fabric in your own home?
I use it mostly for wall covering, but I also use it for windows, and I have some of these plastic yarns knit into scrims at the windows, and I'm training ivy up them.
Why do you suppose it is that at this point we've become a nation of collectors?
It's counter to our being a mass production, mass culture country, and having something that's special, that is uniquely ours, is important. I collect almost everything. I'm not a major collector of fine arts, but in art and craft media, I buy passionately and with great pleasure.
How did you first begin to travel and collect, and how important an influence has that been on your life and work?
I think a standard of excellence more than anything else, that I learn from all of these pieces and what's good about them, and can I ever achieve something so fine, so perfect as that? And that's what I'm competing with, is tradition. But I was first invited to Haiti to help with the the first hand-spun, hand-woven fabrics there. And that was in '52. We've been working ever since, and it was so wonderful. I really learned to respect hand-spun yarns, and then to Mexico and Colombia, and finally in the late '50s to the Far East. And uncovering, working with the simplest people in the most remote countries taught me other points of view. Certainly an appreciation that if one has the really beautiful material, that one doesn't need to do anything else but to maintain it, not upstage it in any way by a complex weave or a combination with other things. A humility. In art school, there was a carving on the college gallery saying the most perfect art is the most anonymous. And I didn't want to be anonymous as a student. I was trying to fight my way out of anonymity. And now, maybe partly working with these simple craftsmen, I'm quite content to make designs that are anonymous and seemingly timeless.
Timeless, I suspect, is different from anonymous. Isn't there really a Jacqueline or Larsen signature that very often one can look at a fabric, a textile, and say it must be Jacqueline or Larsen?
I think that's true of a number of them, yes.
And how would you characterize those textiles?
Maybe as vigor. I've long felt that Americans had no business being courtly or trying to imitate courtly traditions, that we're too red-blooded. And that's, if we have any quality that's good, that's what it is we say what we mean, and we say what we experience, what we feel, and we're not overly refined. And I feel that our environment should not be either.
A pioneer in new uses for woven materials, Jacqueline Orr Larsen is an artist of discriminating taste, firm conviction, and experienced business judgment. He combines technical know-how with poetic insight to create and sustain his constantly evolving craft. I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein for Handmade in America.